What's up everyone, and welcome back to more Reddit stories about entitled people, crazy people, and anything else we find interesting. So be sure to subscribe if you haven't yet for more Reddit content, and let's get into today's stories. Dispatch, there's an officer being held hostage by a cow. I first heard about this story at my father's retirement ceremony. So I asked my father the full details of what he could remember about the cow, and he told me all that he could remember. This was his second year on the force as a police officer, so this was before I was even born. He's already retired after 25 years of service, so he was a little fuzzy on some of the details. Okay, so some general background is that for about 15 years my father was on the motorcycle patrol. Our city is mostly suburban, not very agricultural, but no high-rise buildings. Just imagine Central Florida towns, not the beach cities, but the Central Florida where it's not very touristy and where most people live. So cows aren't very common downtown, but apparently once in a blue moon a cow will jump over the railroad tracks and wander downtown. So Officer Clumsy, as we will call him, was sent by dispatch to figure out if there was actually a cow downtown and not just some kid playing a prank. So he drove down there in his police cruiser, and sure enough, there's this regular old cow just standing in the middle of the railroad crossing. It didn't react to the sirens, so Officer Clumsy, who had grown up on a farm so generally knew how cows behave, turned off his car for some reason, got out and slowly approached to make sure it wasn't injured. The cow didn't appreciate being approached by a stranger and started to chase Officer Clumsy towards his car. Now remember, he had turned off his cruiser and coincidentally never put the keys in his pocket. You can guess where this is going. Since this was a fully grown cow that weighed as much as a small car, Officer Clumsy wasn't staying around to play Matador. He turned around and yelled into his radio that he needed backup immediately. And as he was running from the soon-to-be Big Mac, he dropped his keys in the road and jumped into his car without realizing. My father was patrolling the area when he heard the panicking screams of someone being chased, so he hopped onto his motorcycle and headed over since he was very close to him. After about a minute of driving, he rolls up on the scene. The cow is headbutting Officer Clumsy's patrol car. My dad then reports to dispatch that Officer Clumsy is being held hostage by the cow, it seems. My dad beeps his siren at the cow without thinking. Bad move. The cow turned around and started to go towards my dad. The road was too small and my dad didn't have the time to turn around, so he bailed, and he ran to the only safe spot, Officer Clumsy's cruiser, who was yelling about the keys, but my dad wasn't having it and ran to the passenger side of the cruiser. Well, there was a problem. The door was locked, and my dad had a very pissed off cow trotting towards him. So he starts running around the police car with the cow right behind him, yelling at Officer Clumsy to unlock the door. On his second lap, he opens the door to see the printer, files, a sandwich, and other things in the seat. My dad isn't too large, about 5'9", but with the police gear, you tend to look a lot bigger. So he looked at that seat and knew he wasn't going to fit. He closes the door and keeps running while screaming for Officer Clumsy to clean off the seat. The funniest thing that happened on the air of the radio was Officer Clumsy reporting to dispatch after an update was requested. Dispatch, he's currently being chased by the cow. I don't think he can come to the phone right now, but I'll take a message. About this point, my father is pretty tired after running almost 9 times around the car. And finally he's able to jump into the car and be just in time for the cow to slam the door closed. He then tells Officer Clumsy to put it in gear and drive away from the mad cow. After being informed that the keys are outside, he proceeds to call dispatch about what is being done. About this time, one of those old massive diesel farm trucks pull up, towing a trailer meant for cows. The driver gets out, and my dad and the other officer are screaming to get back in the car, when the cow just calmly stops headbutting the doors and walks to the back of the trailer, and patiently waits for this old guy in his 60s to walk over and open the trailer for it. It climbs in and sticks its head out the window, staring at 2 completely bewildered cops. The owner was given a couple of fines, but mostly let off with a slap on the wrist for letting a dangerous animal escape. According to the people watching from the windows nearby, they couldn't stop laughing and wished they had recorded it. Mentally ill man was denied service at 5 different hotels before coming to mine. I work nights at a hotel front desk and had a guy come in around 3 a.m. He seemed a little shaken, but I figured it wasn't my business and check him in per usual. We start talking a little while I'm running his card, and he informs me that his brother drove him to 5 different hotels in the area, but they wouldn't give him a room. I commented on how that was strange and maybe they were sold out. and he told me that most of them told him he was too erratic, and that's why he was denied service. I should have known better, but I felt sympathetic for him and expressed that I thought that was wrong of them to do. He then feels comfortable enough to tell me that he's having a rough night because his ex-girlfriend had been stalking him, and that his house was now unsafe. I expressed more sympathy for his situation, and then he tells me about his time in the military, and how he knows too much. It was a weird conversation, but he went to his room after, so I didn't think about it too much. Then I'm doing my front desk thing for about an hour before I hear the stairwell door open, and this man is in nothing but his underwear holding a gun. The stairwell is right next to our breakfast area, so he starts going back and forth from the stairwell to the kitchen trying to hide, all while telling me to call 911 and that he's about to die. So I do. I hide in the back office, call 911, and tell them there's a naked man with a gun in my lobby, all while having a mental breakdown. Not one of my finest moments. Then in the middle of all that, a group of construction guys walk in ready to check into their reservations. They only speak a little bit of English, so to the best of my ability, I'm telling them to wait outside, and they can clearly see this random naked guy, who was hiding his gun from them. So they start walking back to the door, and that's when this guy starts talking to them, and accuses them of being the gang members that his girlfriend hired. I tell them to just keep walking and to not engage, and thankfully they do. Police finally show and get the guy in handcuffs, and he actually says, "Why are you arresting me?" He legit didn't see an issue with anything he did that night. Although he never pointed the gun directly at me, he was waving it around the whole time, and was constantly loading and unloading it. I remember at one point before the police showed, his friendliness towards me stopped, and he got frustrated that I was crying to the 911 operator. The cherry on top is that the cameras weren't working that night, and my manager claimed I was being very dramatic about the whole thing. I am actually in the process of quitting the hotel industry specifically because of this incident. I'll do what I want in my own yard. Okay, I'll make it impossible to enjoy your air. Last spring, my old neighbor, who was a saint, sold their house and moved away. The people that moved in were awful. The guy, who we'll call Pete, owns some sort of new black Mustang that sounds like it has no muffler, and he revs it up and down the subdivision streets in the evenings literally 5 days a week when a lot of people, myself included, sit on the back porch and watch TV during the summer. It is relentless. This guy also drives up and down the state highway that is on the other side of my house doing the same thing but louder because it's a 55-mile-per-hour speed limit. You can hear it for miles. And he has friends over regularly in the backyard, and they sit there on the weekends and some weeknights revving up the car. It truly is so loud that you cannot do anything but wait for him to be done. There was a big Facebook conversation in the HOA group, and a bunch of neighbors politely asked him not to do this. Pete's exact response: "I pay a lot of money for this house. I'll do what I want in my own yard, and the streets are public." Well, I didn't like that, so here's what I did next with a little context. Our subdivision has about 150 houses on 300 acres. It's big. Most of the properties in this subdivision are between 1 to 4 acres in size. I have a 3-acre corner. Due to an agreed-upon land split/sale 10 years ago, between the HOA, all neighbors within the vicinity, and the former owners, my next-door neighbor's house is on the smallest piece of property in the subdivision at 0.45 acres. I've attached a stunning artistic representation here. Note the green borders. Those are all 10-foot privacy fences that are white vinyl. And note the little pentagon shape. That comes in handy later. The only side of Pete's house not bordered by someone else's privacy fence is the side that my house is on. Well, I know from 15 years of living here that any time I have a fire on the side of the yard next to Pete's, the smoke is guaranteed to travel in the direction of Pete's house. I know this because I couldn't ever have a fire when my old neighbor was outside, as it would literally fill her backyard with smoke if ever the wood had even a hint of moisture in it. So I moved my fire pit about a dozen years ago to the other side of my house and towards the road so that I could be a good neighbor. And Pete letting me know that he wouldn't quit making noise reminded me that I just loved having my fire pit right in the middle of my backyard. That's where the little pentagon is in the diagram above. It took me a single weekend to dig up the pavers and blocks, move them back to my preferred spot, and get myself a fire going in my new fire pit. I just need to wait until Pete had people over. I made sure the inaugural fire was a good one. Pete had friends over, it was a nice day, and so I started the fire. Got it just about started, and then I added all the wettest, grossest wood I could. And about 10 minutes later, Pete and all of his friends were visibly upset by the stench, so they all went in. They came back out a little later. I added more wet, nasty wood. They went in again. I kept that up the entire day, and then I added a bunch of grass clipping to keep it going overnight. The next day, still smoldering, still smelling awful. I put out a Facebook post on the HOA website that let people know I'd be continuing to utilize my fire pit as often as possible, so they could bring me their lawn scraps. I had about 20 people respond in a few hours saying their clippings were all mine. I kept that fire going. My dogs are good alarms and they rush outside anytime anybody is in Pete's backyard, so I would hear the dog scramble, go out, and add more clippings. After about 3 weeks, Pete and his wife came out and very kindly asked me what was going on with the fire pit. She very politely informed me that her hair would smell like a campfire if she went into her backyard for any amount of time, and they could smell it coming into their house through their ductwork. He said I was making it hard for him to enjoy his backyard with his friends. They asked me if I could ease back with the fire because I, quote, probably didn't know that it was impacting so much of their home life. I looked at him and his wife, and I said that it was clear that sometimes we didn't recognize how big of an effect something could have on our neighbors until they told us about it. But then I said as objectively as possible that I normally live by the same I'll do what I want in my yard thought process as Pete does. I have a right to enjoy my yard. I looked at Pete dead in the eyes and said, and I know you support that because of how the conversation concluded about your car, right, Pete? He looked at me like I scratched his favorite CD. He knew what I was doing. And his wife looked at him and it just dawned on her. She said she gets it and we won't hear the Mustang anymore. I said thanks. I took a gamble and put the fire out right after that. It was the right call. I haven't talked to them much since. I'm not too concerned about that because I haven't heard the Mustang since either. And that's going to be it for today, friends. Thank you for watching, I appreciate it. And as always, if you enjoyed, be sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more Reddit shenanigans. So take care, and I'll see you next time.